And then welcome everyone to our cohort 10 training. We'll be talking about community volunteers and in the important role that they have in our community. Ruby will be leading us in that conversation. And then we will start a discussion at the end. And so there might be some people in the room that you haven't met yet. So make sure to introduce yourself when you speak up or talk. But if everybody, just to get us started, wants to put how they're feeling in either a word or an emoji in the chat, so we can have that little source of connection to start us off with. So take a chance to do that as Ruby starts us off. Oh, John, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Hi, my friends call me John, and I'm an alcoholic, and I am really happy to let everybody know that yesterday I had 15 months sober. That's all.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Awesome. Ruby, want to take us off?
Okay.
Or kick us off?
Sure. Happy to do that. Hi, everybody. Now comes the part in our conversations that I like the least, and that is I have to share my screen because it means that I can't see you all as well. But my goal is to walk us through these slides. Please put your questions in the chat. Ashley Welch will tell me if there's a specific question I should answer right away. But if not, we'll make it through the slides. I'll be able to see your faces again and we'll have a conversation. So that's where I'm heading. Can you see that? Is it a full screen for you all? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So hi, everybody. We met last week and talked about navigating the different roles. And in that conversation, we talked about your core leadership team and how that core leadership team envisions a business operating plan, a program plan, and that includes the staffing that you'll need. That includes the how many members you anticipate your space will hold. And that includes thinking about your community volunteer program. So community volunteers, the way to conceptualize it is as part of your plan for opening your cafe. It may be that pre-opening, even among those that are helping you gather the plans or making the next steps before opening, might be volunteers. That's a little bit different than when you're open, you have a community volunteer plan. So there's going to be some back and forth language, but just to be clear, the latter is what we're talking about. Okay, so what are the learning targets for today? Thank you, Ashley Welch, for these beautiful photos. Is to just talk about that role in your program once you're open. Think through just some early ideas, how to engage volunteers, and then talk about structures. By that, we mean welcome, orientation, ongoing support, exiting, training. What structures will you need to think about as you plan for this in your space? So what is the role of the community volunteer? It's to be a part of your opening and operating cafe. And they are people who you as the core team and your staff are welcoming into the work. So community volunteers, they are people like you and I, probably in other organizations as well. And in our lifetimes, we've been community volunteers for other nonprofits. Be fun if you want to put in the chat where you've been a volunteer for other groups. But it's because the person wants to give back in some way in an area of interest. In a recovery cafe world, it tends to be someone who has a little bit more stability in their recovery. And this is a way of giving back. Generally, that's a kind of a good way to think about it. And it's someone who doesn't necessarily need week-to-week support or still trying to get their feet under them in recovery, because that's the kind of person that might be better supported as a member in your community. So and examples of volunteer roles would be a cafe companion, someone who comes in every week or every other week to support your cafe floor. Could be a barista who comes in weekly. We have some baristas who come in once a month, and special events assistants, but you'll see in the manual there a whole range of ways people give back as cafe companions, cafe volunteers. So when you, as the core team, you've welcomed people into your community space, you've got a member process, you've got members in your circles, you've got the flow, you're at the same time growing a volunteer culture. You've got a cafe culture, a member culture, and the volunteer culture is exactly the same. You're inviting people into your space to live by guiding principles of love and respect and compassion down the line. And you're, from the get-go of recruitment and training, talking about that's who you are as a community, because that helps the person decide, this is a cool place. This resonates with me. This is the kind of organization I want to volunteer with. So why would somebody want to be a community volunteer? And I'm sure you've all thought through this in your own personal lives as you've given back to other places. A person might have a personal recovery to connection to recovery as the person themselves with experience, family member, friend, co-worker, advocate. So they might want to be engaged for those reasons, professional or personal growth, and maybe put in the chat some other reasons why someone might be motivated to be a community volunteer in your cafe. So what are some ways to engage with volunteers? It kind of depends on the type of volunteers, and the big buckets, and I'm sure there are others, the big buckets that we experience in Seattle are individuals who just, for whatever reason, I'm an individual and I've heard about the cafe and the work they do, and I want to go and give my time. Sometimes you might have another bucket of groups. So we've got corporate groups, the local Safeway, the local bank, Microsoft sometimes comes in and says, we've got one of our teams that for the holidays or for spring, we want to bring our team out in 10 people to do a group event, to do a group clean. So earlier this spring, a group from my church came and cleaned up the outside of one of our cafes. So they're individuals, one bucket. Another type is groups, and groups typically come once a year or just once a season. Community partners are another kind of volunteers. We think of those as groups that might come in to provide a service in your cafe. So public health nurses are another kind of volunteer for the Public Health Service Corps that bring their work into the cafe to help our members with vaccines, foot care. So they're volunteering, and they're another kind of group. They're not technically community volunteers in our system, but they're partners that do volunteer work in our world. So let's, one of those buckets, the individual volunteers, what are some types? They can be folks who just come and hang out and have coffee in your space, play chess, read books, teach classes. We at the moment in Seattle have 3 volunteers who did that for a number of years, got really familiar with our community, and then took the training as recovery coaches to become recovery circle facilitators. They are doing that and offering that service as a community volunteer. Our board members are volunteers. Our School for Recovery faculty are volunteers. We have a couple of faculty who we do a little bit of a stipend for our yoga person, but most of the other teachers are volunteers. And then special event support, like our resource day, our Thanksgiving dinner, special events. So those are the kinds of things that individual CVs do. Groups do just a summary, and you'll have these slides, so they'll be available. Like my church group, for instance, they were on site for 4 hours. We identified a task. We invited them into our space. I did an overview, showed them our video. They got to know members. Then they did the outside cleanup of the landscaping, cleaned up, came back inside, shared a meal with members, and then I debriefed with them. Took their questions with that small group of 4 to 6. And then they went on their way. And there's not scheduled to come back again, but we consider that a volunteer group. On-site community partners, the example were the public health nurses. These are groups that come into the cafe to provide a resource. So they have less of the ongoing support, which we'll talk about in a minute, but wanted to have this slide in here so you could see the different ways that once you've got your cafe operating, you can invite volunteers into your space.
Ruby, we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Jodine asked, are we supposed to enter our community volunteers and agency?
Great question. Yes, Jodine. Typically, we not the on-site partners per se, but the individual volunteers, they are entered as a member in your cafe, as a member in agency, and they have a special designation as a community volunteer. So that allows you to differentiate them. And that way, when the volunteer comes into the front door, we typically ask for a 2-hour shift. We're able to enter them and keep track of who's on site. And, interesting question, because one of our volunteers, longtime community volunteer, at the end of the tax year asked us, how many hours did I volunteer for you? Because then she was going to write that off on her taxes as part of her contribution of service. So if you track it that way, then you're able to provide that information.
Thanks, Ruby. And then Jodine also asked, do they have to attend new member introduction?
Great question. We'll get to that in a minute, but I like how you're thinking, Jodine. They don't have to. They have a community volunteer introduction. So we'll turn to that pretty soon. Great question. Good. I'm going to move on, Ashley. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay. So how do you support your community volunteers with some structures? Jodine, here's your question. We have, it's not cut in stone, but just some big buckets of how you think about inviting community volunteers. There's recruitment. What materials do you have? What brochures? What's on your website for letting people know you're open and wanting to receive community volunteers? Once someone engages with you, there's an orientation. We think about ongoing support and having a healthy goodbye is a way to model community. So we'll talk about these in turn. So recruiting volunteers, where should you look? What are some ideas? Please actually unmute and shout them out. Where would your volunteers be coming from?
Just the community.
Yep.
We have a lot of volunteers with sober living residences near the cafe.
Yep. Aaron, are those volunteers also likely to be good member candidates?
They are great member candidates. Sometimes because of their IOP schedule, they're not able to make a circle at first.
Yeah.
Once they're finished with IOP, a lot of times after being a volunteer, they begin to be members.
I love that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So this role gives you some flexibility on how someone might have eyes on the community. So we've had that happen before. A person, for whatever reason, class or IOP, not able to make a regular member circle, wants to be a community volunteer. We give it a shot and it works beautifully. And we've also had the example of they try that, and because they're still an IOP, they don't have enough stability to be even a CV, and they're needing clearly more support. So then that's a hard conversation, right? We have to say, you know what? We really feel like our best love and support of you is to suggest that you wait until you can come every week and become a member. And then people, for some reason, feel like that's a demotion, but really it's trying to meet them where they are. But having that flexibility allows you to engage with people wherever they are and then make a better decision about what's a good fit. But that's a great source of volunteers. Other ideas?
Rose had a question that lent itself to this, but I saw somebody just pop up so they can add their thoughts.
How about interns?
Great question. Yes, we have had interns in the cafe from school settings. And, I don't know that we have a formalized place to talk about that. I'll make a note to self, but we have had the experience of different kinds of interns. And what we've learned over the years is that it's much better to be more structured. So if someone wants to come to the cafe to be an intern for a school requirement, we ask that they make at least a 9-month commitment for, I think, 8 to 10 hours a week. And that they have a faculty supervisor in their program that we can give feedback to. So those kinds of interns come and volunteer their time, but we're also training them. They get to be in recovery circles. They get to be in our consult. We also have student volunteers from the University of Washington who are not able to do a 9-month commitment. It's not a formal part of their program, but they want to get some experience in the field. They then sign on as just regular community volunteers with the same requirements, at least 2 hours, at least twice a month. And we ask for, I think, a 6-month commitment. It's a great question. Students and interns are a good source.
And so Rose asked, are there also resource providers that come in to bring people in, and do we put them in, I'm guessing, agency as community volunteers?
Great question. So we think of those, because those in my mind, they're more like community partners, because the external provider is bringing that person as part of their work for their organization. And so we don't log their attendance per se, but their member is tracked in agency.
Okay, so we don't sign them in or anything?
You could sign them in, and you probably would sign them in as a visitor, but they don't
Okay.
have a profile in agency that the other provider doesn't. But the other
Okay.
provider from another group brings a member and wants to introduce them to your cafe. That member may become a member who has entered an agency as a member. Does that make sense?
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Okay. So once you've engaged people, you've got your website, people see this is who I contact, we make first email, there's an orientation to the role. So what we have is someone reaches out to us via our website, their scheduled time to sign up. Our volunteer coordinator might meet with a group of them to say, here's our volunteer program. Welcome, this is who we are. Here are some options for how you might engage with our cafe. And then they have a one-to-one conversation to kind of hear what makes you feel most alive? How would you like to volunteer? Do you want to be a companion? Do you want to be a barista? Are you a cook? Do you want to bake? Because we're always with our volunteers, as with members, trying to meet them where they are, because they are part of our invitation into community. The orientation is we have a volunteer handbook. I think there's a template that you could modify for your locations that kind of provides some guidance about the cafe and how we code of conduct for volunteers. And another really helpful piece of their orientation to the role of what they're doing is to pair them with another volunteer who's done it for a while, so they can do a kind of a shadowing, come alongside model what that volunteer role looks like. So this is still the welcoming structure, the introduction to the role. So there's another way that you think about how you're welcoming somebody, what structures set them up for success as a volunteer in your community as an orientation to the culture. So in that initial orientation to the role, you make sure you talk about your mission, your guiding principles, how we welcome everyone with the same hospitality, that we're all in recovery, that we share this journey, and then conversations about healthy boundaries. So in our handbook, there are guidelines about giving members rides, not a good idea, giving members money, not a good idea. But if that happens, how do you talk about it? How do you access staff to help get support in responding to a member? Next big structure that you're building in your program for community volunteers is training and ongoing support. In the same way that staff have a regular check-in, in the same way that members have a weekly recovery circle, community volunteers are invited to a once-a-month check-in so that they can hear stories, they can do Q&A, they can talk about what they're learning and what's challenging and joyful in the role as community volunteers. Right now, that's held as a hybrid because of COVID. But pre-COVID, it was held once a month on site, and volunteers are invited to that. The slight difference is that's not a requirement. If a volunteer, because they're working, can't come to that once a month, our volunteer coordinator does a check-in to make sure they've got ongoing support. So again, Aaron, I'm coming back to your question. We still have eyes on. If the volunteer looks like they need more support from us and that the invitation to once a month is enough or not enough, we don't want to be messing them up by not giving them what they need or offering what they need. We have a volunteer email with updates and special events, because even if, let's say I come in once a week on Wednesdays to make coffee, but on Fridays there's going to be a special party, there has to be a way for me to know about that so I can come back and join the larger community and feel more engaged. That's what happens in the volunteer email, newsletters. And then we have an annual volunteer appreciation event. Very interesting to have that on the space, because then the members are celebrating the volunteers who come less than they do and engage in a different way. During COVID, members wrote letters that we put into snail mail, thank you notes to volunteers. But again, you as the core team, as building your program, you're finding ways to support the community volunteers. Now, there may be times when a community volunteer may shift into a staff role, or as we talked earlier, may shift into a member role, but it still is an identified space in your community structure. So another, I think, really important call out for the structures that you provide as the program planners is acknowledging goodbyes, because healthy boundaries are about healthy hellos and expectations and about saying goodbye. So many in our community, they've had a long history. I know myself too, took me a while to just learn how to honestly say, I'm different now. What I need is different. I need to volunteer with this other part of this other location and say goodbye. And bringing that to a close can be a real gift, both to the person leaving and the person that's left still in the cafe. All sides have had painful experiences of goodbyes that were not acknowledged or recognized or provided. So just trying to structure that, talking about that as you train volunteers, and then making real space for it. So we have at times, we do this for staff too, but a volunteer is going back to school, moving off to another state, we will celebrate them in the space. Thank you, Jodine, thank you, Rose, for being a volunteer all these years. The members will pipe up and show their gratitude. And that's a nice closure for everyone. And the acknowledging goodbyes, this ask for feedback bullet, thanks for putting it there, Ashley Walsh, it's a little bit like an exit interview. What worked, what didn't work. We would welcome you back. Let us know how we can support that. Do I see a hand, Gilbert? Happy to take that question.
Yes, I product of the volunteer status as well. I volunteered my time and everything, and then I took the training, and it was very more. I did it in increments, but I volunteered so myself accountable for me and my recovery and my actions. Then I went to run a circle. And then I also did the arts and crafts activities for the school of recovery part to become who I am now. So now that I'm hired, I did everything in increments. So I knew the timing was right. Sometimes we get ahead of ourselves, so not sure and everything. But if it wasn't for me to take the time and volunteer to get familiar on what I was going to do, that's what the reward is giving back. And like I said, but it started off for me volunteering, knowing when to volunteer, when to take the next level, and then I did that in increments. So thank you very much. I just wanted to share that. I'm a final product of a volunteering being success and just started.
Yeah. Thank you, Gilbert, for calling that out. Such a great example. Totally agree. And it sounds like you really benefited from the cafe where you are, knowing what the different roles were so that you could know what to expect. And am I wanting to do that? Am I ready to do that? The expectations of the role help you define what was a good fit for you. And you do that in conversation with staff. So now you in turn as a staff person are having conversations with people who want to be volunteers. Is this a good fit for you? Is membership a better fit for you right now? Because you've lived them all. Awesome. And some additional resources.
Which will be added before I upload the slides. It's been a busy week, y'all. But
So I'm so glad not to, so you will have those slides to review. I would love to hear, that's kind of how we think about community volunteers. Questions, thoughts, happy to have a conversation. What do you think?
Oh, I just sent an email to Ashley, but I had a question. So I was just curious, like, I understand putting them as a visitor and everything, but wouldn't it be cool? I don't know. This is a suggestion. I'm not very good at making suggestions, but like having a drop down maybe for registration for community partners so they could be a part of the, or is that just too much?
No, that's a great
Okay.
question. So yeah, I could see that, because then you would,
Well, because they're here often, you know what I mean? And that way we have them here and then we could look out and be like, oh, okay, this person, you know what I mean? That way,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. You know what, Rose, that's a great thought. Did you say you sent an email? So we'll have a.
I sent one to Ashley suggesting that, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, Ashley, would you ping me later?
yeah.
So I can see that.
Yeah, and I want to also clarify the difference between like community volunteer and community partner. I think like the difference, but just in case other people aren't in agency
I was
yet.
actually confused about
Yeah,
it.
okay.
So that's
So community volunteer is like a volunteer. We have a whole structure and agency to record them and have them in there. That's something that when you do agency training, you'll learn. I know at the beginning they don't throw that to you just because we don't want to throw too much at you when you onboard onto agency, but you can look to see what or look at the agency manual in the meantime, or reach out to Rachel and Christo through the support email for more if you have questions about that. But a community partner is a little bit more of a dynamic relationship that can be recorded as a visitor. If there's like a consistent relationship, maybe there's another way you'll want to record that. Ruby, maybe you can talk about what that's looked like in your experience.
Yep. Thanks, Rose. I'm so glad you said that. It's a great question, because you do want to find a way to track that, but they are not technically your community volunteers, because that other provider, you're not holding them in your bucket necessarily. You are a partner with them, giving support, providing support to the bucket. So here's an example. There's a university here in the Northwest called Bastyr, naturopaths. They're awesome. And they, once a week, bring students on site and offer a naturopathic clinic. So they're an external partner that brings people in to do services. They're volunteering. So that's the tricky part, but put the volunteering part aside. So what we've done is we've entered Bastyr as a class in agency. So they're technically a school for recovery class that offers naturopathic encounters. And that way we can track how many times that class has been held and which of our members received a service from them. So that's one way that we track it. If you've got a regular partner, you could consider it that way, but we're also going to run it by Rachel Marin, because there are some providers that aren't offering that regular structure. So another way we do it, Rose, is we have something called the Resource Connection Day. And a Resource Connection Day is like a fair. And at the fair, there are multiple different providers. There's food, there's vet, there's dental, there's foot, there's vaccines. That's also entered in agency as a class. And those different providers are listed there. So there's a way to track it. So we're able to look up on any given event, Resource Connection Day, which provider, which community partner came in as to that fair. Hope that clarifies. Sorry if I was confusing earlier. Great question.
I'm gonna throw in a question that might help others start thinking about if they're not open, what this might look like. But Ruby, what are some factors or considerations to think about when trying to implement a community volunteer program? Because that is a lift where you have to support people and have to have the capacity to support people. So how would you advise people to approach making that decision?
About when and to start a community volunteer program?
Mhm.
Yep, great question. It depends. And what it depends on is where you are in the process. Do you feel like you have enough of your cafe community with members itself stable and up and running? So that's one consideration. Another consideration is how much interest you're getting from people in the community. I want to be a regular volunteer. That kind of helps you think, okay, this in our setting is a need. We want to meet the community where it's at to create space for community volunteers. A third consideration is, are we at a place as a core team to dedicate some of our core team energy to holding the community volunteer program? Because it's still going to be something you as the core team need to hold. That's where it gets like you're juggling different roles. Yeah, because your mind easily goes to, we got all these volunteers. They're going to help us do this work, which is absolutely true. But it's also at the same time, you must remember your core team has to help the volunteers help you do their work. Does that make sense? Because you are shepherding your community volunteers as well. You're nurturing their recovery, their healing. You're nurturing how they're going to integrate into your larger community because they're coming alongside you to support your members. And I can't tell you how many times over the years, a community volunteer ultimately says, I'll say thank you so much for coming in every week to make lattes. And they will break down and cry and they will say, Ruby, thank you and this community for allowing me to come because I've been healed as a community volunteer by engaging in this recovery space. And so that really required attention to us in your community and making sure that your team knows this is part of their work. So we have a community volunteer who's sometimes a little challenging, a little oppositional, like who's not oppositional on some days, right? Community volunteers, a little oppositional. Staff's like, hey, knock it off. You're supposed to be helping. I have to come in and say, staff person, remember, we are raising up our volunteers. So it's not like, go away because you're not really helping. It's, that's why they're here, to be in our community. That is back to our job is to create space and serve the volunteer. That's the bi-directional. I hope that makes sense.
And Ruby, how about those volunteers that are present and working alongside core teams when like before the cafe begins, because they're just like really interested in like helping create this cafe, but not able to like be a part of the core team for various reasons. So like what is that like how do you differentiate whether that person is a community volunteer or just a volunteer with a little v with a lowercase v, especially if your team doesn't have the capacity to have all these different support structures that are there or that we recommend?
Yep. This is an experienced group because you see this is a human enterprise and they're not ever going to be these neat categories. So there will be people, and we had that at the beginning. People wanted to volunteer their time, but we didn't have a volunteer program in place. So we had to just be mindful. The core team maybe shepherded that person, and those volunteers gather around this core team because it's our connections, our personal relationships that get people interested. So this core team is mindful. We need to make sure they know who we are, what our guiding principles are, check in on their experience, give them support, and figure out what do they want to do to give back, what makes them feel alive. So you're still doing the same functions without necessarily having the program in place. But it's more held by the smaller core team. Does that make sense? So even your board, our board is a volunteer board, but we are the core team, the core leadership team. We check in with our board. What makes us feel like a good place for you to serve? All those same relationship conversations, even though they're not technically in our community volunteer world, because we don't track their attendance. They didn't have to apply in the same way that a community volunteer applies. We have an application form online. So slightly different process, but still they're volunteers. I hope that didn't sound too wishy-washy, but that's the kind of dancing, right? Without dancing outside the strict bucket lines.
Mhm. And maybe we can all go around and talk about what we're imagining our community volunteers will do in our cafe, what roles they'll hold, or how we'll support them. If there's anything that you're feeling really called to share, or that you're feeling called to share about that.
I'm happy to share. Thanks for that invite. We in West Sacramento, we're getting ready to open the cafe on October 5th, which is super exciting. And then, of course, the minute you say that, you suddenly realize that there are 8,000 things that have to be done between now and then. So we have our site, and we have announced that. In fact, we announced it in a newsletter this morning, and I have been inundated all morning by people going, I want to help, I want to help, I want to help. And then I'm sitting here in this going, okay, we don't have the structure in place for them yet. And we need to build that scaffolding very, very quickly for a community volunteer program. So we've had other, because we're an existing agency, we have had other enterprises where we have facilitated lots and lots of volunteers. But I don't think we've done it as well as you're describing it. And I don't think we've done it with as quite as much intentionality as you're describing it, and as we would really like to do it here. I absolutely see the importance of it. I guess maybe if I had a question as I'm sitting here processing all of this is, we are going to have to ramp a community volunteer program very quickly. What items would you say would be the priority? What pieces of that structure would you say need to come first and foremost ahead of everything else to embrace and handle sort of this wonderful deluge of interest that we have of people wanting to help? It's an extremely wordy question. I hope it made sense.
It's a great question. I love that question. Dawn, I guess my mind goes first to, I wonder how many of those really excited, awesomely enthusiastic people might be good members.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sitting here making notes on their names as they come in, asking the very same thing. Yeah.
So I think your first task is to kind of create some structure. So this is what membership will look like, and ask them, is this what you're interested in?
Mhm.
Is this a weekly commitment? So you might even create an email list of all these people, of course, BCC, so they don't see each other for privacy, but here's what membership will look like. And as a member, people give back, and you could volunteer in our space and help us build this together. That might be what they're looking for. Or then you can parse through who will actually be kind of more like a community volunteer who, because of their work schedule, can't come to a weekly circle. I don't know. That's the kind of parsing I would start to do at this stage.
Yeah.
All those emails. And then again, think through who on your team is going to field those. Because at the end of the day, you're still going to have one-on-one conversations to see how this person will fit into your space. I don't know if that helps.
That does, it does, and it aligns with what was starting to fire in my mind. Going first and foremost, I think I need to really identify that person on our team that all of these things are going to funnel towards, and can help provide the structure and the conversations and the parsing out that you're describing. So helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. Actually, what I don't know, but maybe Don, it would be helpful if you go to our website and see what does RC Seattle. They have a PDF. You might even create a volunteer form, an application form. Just say, hey, thanks for all this interest. Can you fill out this form? Name, contact, what they'd like to do. That way you can sort immediately. These people all want to make coffee. These people all want to make cookies. You can make cookies today. So you can just sort of guess, get a sense of what they want to give back, but you have a form that helps you parse them out.
Mhm.
Right.
With some
Very
structure.
good, very good.
And if I can share my screen, I think we would all benefit from seeing the resources we have for community volunteers specifically in our content library. I think these are in Milestone 3 as well, but some of our we're still making sure that all the things are translated into both spaces. So we have a sample community volunteer manual that you can, copy and make it your own, so that you're able to have this as a resource when new member or new volunteers come on. And so obviously it'll have to be specific to what your community volunteer program and cafe looks like, but there's a lot of great language in here. And so there's that. There's a community volunteer orientation slideshow. It is the COVID-19 edition, just because our it shifted a little bit, and I think partially was virtual or mostly virtual for a long time. So that you can use as inspiration for when you hold community volunteer orientation. So it kind of walks through like what the different roles could be, what our events are that they could be a part of. And then there's a sample of like all the even though they're not staff, they are job descriptions. They do hold responsibility when you're in different roles. So these are like a little bit of the different opportunities that are there and what they'll look like. And then, there's a template volunteer interest form too. This one, I believe, is paper, which of course people might fill out, but a lot of people do use digital forms online to, streamline the process, or so that people who are online just looking for a place to volunteer can show their interest, even if they can't come in person quite yet. It looks like Connie has a question.
So are you putting that in the library, or is it already in there?
So this is in the content library already. I'll double check right now as we talk to make sure that it's in Milestone 3, but I just didn't want to throw you in the wrong direction if it wasn't. So just give me one moment to check. But does anybody have questions about like those kinds of materials, or maybe how Ruby and others have approached creating those?
Ashley, thanks for finding those. I totally forgot we had those.
I just say those are great. That just rockets the whole process forward for all of us that are starting up. So fantastic, you guys. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Don, make them your own. Those are Seattle specific. So be creative. Do what you need to do. Connie, did I see your hand up again, or was that from the previous time?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm in the library and I don't see that, so.
Yeah, I'm gonna put them in there now because I want y'all to have easy access to them. So I'll do that before I post the slides and stuff, because sometimes my computer is slow to download things. So
I can never remember all the cafes, but Aaron, I'm going to call you out again because I know you've got a cafe open. So any thoughts, or you want to hear your experiences if you feel comfortable?
Sure, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, we have a volunteer orientation, which is kind of like a new member introduction that just kind of orients people to the cafe. I'm taking notes on maybe something we could be doing a little bit better about with our outside groups. Often we do a tour and kind of explain our model and give them brochures and literature about the cafe, but I don't believe we show a video, which I think is a really great way to engage people and just present the information in a way that doesn't rely on someone like me remembering everything that we want to get across. So we have had a lot of success with Midway University. They have one of their professors of psychology is a community volunteer, and he also runs an art organization that does community partner activities here and providing art. So art therapy and it's anyway a really cool thing. Anyway, so he, as a professor, he has an internship program, and so we work with them, and some of those interns have become members, and because they were invited to by other members to sit in on a circle. And so once they went to circle, this one guy who was extremely shy felt like he had an opportunity to really engage with people in a small group level. Anyway, because Lexington is a university town, we do have some fraternities and sororities and internship programs, and some church groups. We just had 12 volunteers last Saturday who came in and made lunch and served lunch. So all that's really cool. We have had a volunteer who we had to set some healthy boundaries with, who was like one of our original volunteers, maybe before we got all the support structures in place that we needed to have. We opened during the pandemic, so I think we were doing our best. This is a very honest assessment. I hope that's okay. So that was a struggle navigating some of the boundary issues with physical touch and with lending money and with providing rides, those are kinds of things. And so we had to actually revisit this a couple of times through loving accountability and kind of a contract agreement thing, kind of like the member agreement when we welcome people back into community. And then ultimately he decided that he didn't want to be a part of the community because of because he was being held accountable, I guess. I don't know. So we've had to navigate some of the things that are messy just about human experience. And in a community context, I often say to our members, community is sometimes difficult, but it's worth it. So I think those are the broad spectrum of our kinds of experiences. When we're opening our second location with these extra support structures in place, I think it will be really important to have a monthly check-in. Right now, we do that mostly on an individual basis, but having two locations, I can kind of imagine that we'd have just a Recovery Cafe Lexington as a whole, both locations, kind of check-in and celebration. And we do an annual volunteer appreciation, both at the holidays, the December holidays, but also at a different point in the year, where we try to acknowledge people's contributions. And both Ricky and Ashley Green got one of the things that we make for our volunteers, which is we have a ceramics class and we make candles out of them. And so we give those to volunteers and donors, and then also our friends who visited from Seattle.
Thanks so much, Aaron. Yeah, I heard about that candle. I was a little jealous, I'm just gonna say. Aaron, thanks for that sharing. And it's such a great example. It maybe a nice place for us to close is what you're describing is one of, I think, the things that makes us have a special sauce in our radical hospitality is because we recognize that human relationships are messy and that there are boundary conversations that have to be had about volunteers, staff, members, and yet they're not rigid. They're more fluid. They're recognizing that we wear different hats. We have dual roles, but we're always about how to welcome someone with a different hat in a healthy way. And I think that is what makes us safe and helps us be safe. It's just that intentionality around roles and relationships and giving people accurate feedback. Today seems like a good day for you to think about being a member instead of a volunteer. But so you just captured our special sauce, I think.
Are there any other questions or thoughts people want to add about any of the stuff we talked about today? Okay, I'm going to open the window and close it. I'll leave us with a couple of reminders. So to start, the next time that we'll meet as a cohort is for cohort 10 check-in on August 4th. And so same time and place and Zoom link. So excited to see y'all there and check in on a personal note. And then our all network conversation, which is on holding space for difficult conversations. We just announced that yesterday. So that'll be held on Wednesday, August 17th from 10 to 11:15 a.m. We hope that y'all can make it. And so that calendar invite and email should have gone out to everybody that's on that you've deemed wanting invitations to network events. So that includes all of you. So if you didn't receive it, please let me know because I'm happy to forward that along. And feel free to bring any thoughts or experiences to reflect on there, and we'll be excited to have difficult conversations about having difficult conversations. So excited to have that time with y'all. And as for those of y'all who are waiting on capacity grant decisions or feedback or whatever, we're working slowly but surely. Some of y'all have already received that. And I'm so excited to be reading all of your applications and hear about the great ways that you're hoping to build your capacity to either open your cafe or further develop it. So thanks y'all for entrusting us with your vision. Any last thoughts or comments or questions or queries? Otherwise, we'll let y'all go on with your day.
I love seeing you all. Thanks so much for just being you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank
Thanks so much,
you.
you guys.
Thank you,
you.
Ruby and
Always,
Ashley
thank
and
you.
everyone.
Yeah.
Have a good
All right,
day.
everybody, be careful and be safe and have a nice weekend.
You too.
You too. Thank you.
Ashley, will you stay?
Or I'll just meet you over on the other side. Well, nice to be seeing you in person. See y'all later. Have a good day.
Bye.